Let me introduce myself and talk a little bit about what I'm going to talk about and why. It's not exactly the wonderful set of things that Don put in his emails, although that's a great agenda for probably several future meetings. As Don said, I am his counterpart on the Environment and Climate Caucus of the Washington State Democrats. Of course, Don is the chair of the Ag and Rural Affairs Caucus of the Washington State Democrats. And he and I hatched this plan to do a thing about nuclear energy. And a funny thing happened when I brought it up to my executive committee. My executive committee was not thrilled. One of the comments that I got was, well, as long as it's balanced, I guess it would be okay. So that response has kind of informed my thinking about this and shaped what it is that I'm going to be talking about. I gather that everybody here, or just about everybody, really is from rural Washington, whichever side of the mountains. Urban Washington has a pretty specific attitude, if I could overgeneralize, has a pretty specific attitude about nuclear power. And I have to think about that a lot as the chair of a statewide caucus. So let me share my screen here. The one thing I'm pretty sure we can all agree on is, there's PowerPoint. One thing I'm pretty sure we can agree on is this, that atmospheric carbon dioxide has been increasing very rapidly on a historical perspective in the last couple of generations. And it's freaking some of us out. I think we can all agree on that. Now, I'm a high school science teacher, and this is, we're in the last week of classes this week. We must be one of the last schools in the state to still be in session. And if you're a little bit triggered by seeing a blast from your high school past, imagine how this makes me feel. Here's what I'm going to be talking about. I ended up with this concept map, and I'm going to be talking about nuclear power, anti, pro, and with a special attention to the agnostics among us. Whenever I talk about controversial topics, I remind myself and the audience that we need to put special effort into doing critical thinking. Critical here means special attention to, as in critical care. It doesn't mean to be critical of. And I try, and I hope everybody else will try, to reason dispassionately and to be open to having my ideas disconfirmed. And we are talking about science, and it turns out science is the management of uncertainty. And so we're all going to try to accept appropriate levels of uncertainty. So I'm going to talk about nuclear energy, and it's hard to talk about nuclear energy because it's such an enormous, complicated topic, and there are so many different angles that it could be approached from. We've got the local and regional aspect of the Columbia Generating Station right here. And we have the United States. We have all of these shut down reactors, including the Indian Point reactor. I just remembered I forgot to include a slide about Indian Point. I'll try to remember to talk about it. And then, of course, we have the international aspect. And it's interesting to look at the size of capacity that Saudi Arabia is building right now. Maybe they know something we don't know. I don't know. So here we are at the beginning, nuclear power. And I want to start with a special shout out to the agnostics. ECC is Environment and Climate Caucus. And as I mentioned at the top of my remarks, I'm still trying to figure out how to deal with my own organization here. But I'm inspired by the Citizens Climate Lobby, which is nuclear agnostic. But the Yakima branch of the Citizen Climate Lobby put on a spectacular and quite technical evening about nuclear energy a couple of weeks ago. And like I say, it was inspiring. And here, me, until recently, well, maybe I'll circle back and talk about the me until recently as an agnostic thing. First, I want to talk about the antis, who I think it's safe to say outnumber the pros in Washington State and maybe even nationally, as surprising as that might be. So who are they and why? Well, first of all, who? There's some pretty obvious players motivated by some pretty obvious things. It was only very recently that big oil had to share its market with anyone, and they didn't like it then, and they don't like it now. The solar and wind industry has been enjoying really boom times, and it is certainly to their interests to have people believing that their technology is the only viable technology. And then I regret to say there is Big Green. And here I mean organizations like Greenpeace, the Sierra Club, big organizations, Big Green. And also I run into 20th century environmentalists a lot. Now, what I mean, I don't mean for this to be pejorative at all. I do mean that I think a lot of us developed certain habits of thought around environmentalism back in the 20th century before we really started to take climate change seriously. And a lot of folks don't seem to have revisited their thinking in light of climate change. Some of these people, Amory Lovins, for example, started out as an anti-nuclear activist back in the 70s and has made a career as what is called a futurist, and publishes regularly, even now, discouraging things about nuclear energy. Mark Jacobson was actually born in 1975, so I don't know if he counts as a 20th century environmentalist, but he's an engineering professor at Stanford, and he has raised anti-nuclear rhetoric to kind of both a science and an art. I might talk about him more a little bit later. Bernie Sanders is on record as opposing nuclear energy. Jane Fonda. Those people are legit 20th century environmentalists. It's not fair to put Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland, lump her in with this group. She, of course, is the first Native American, maybe even the first Native American. And Native Americans have reasons to have some attitudes about nuclear energy. Many Washington State Democrats, as I mentioned, including the Democratic Party platform. And I've also mentioned that some national Democratic Party leaders are actively anti-nuclear, although it might be more fair to put most of them in the agnostic camp. I don't remember if I'm going to discuss why some people might be in the agnostic camp, but one is conflict avoidance. You know, there are a lot of important things that need to be fought about, and not everyone may feel that nuclear power is one of the ones that they need to put their attention into. So I have separate slides of this segment and this segment. I'm going to skip over those and go to the State Democratic Party platform. And I hate to read this to you, but I'm kind of going to read this to you. And I want to I want to call your attention to the kind of language that's used in these three planks. So this is a kind of a pro-nuclear plank here: support energy research, including development of utility scale stuff, which involves next generation nuclear. And then here we have two planks. I think they might even be on the same page. They are in the same section, that take the opposite view. This one says that we want to place a moratorium on new or expanded nuclear power. And then, as if anybody missed the point, they specifically call out small nuclear reactors. Now, here's where I want you to notice the syntax. They could have left it at that, but they didn't. They added that produce high-level nuclear waste. You don't even call the stuff that comes out of a reactor nuclear waste. It's spent fuel. It can be reused. It can be reprocessed. It's true that we don't yet have a place to dispose of it, but it can also be parked for long periods of time, and that's where it is right now. This one here is my favorite, though. Require analyses of whether reliance on decades-old nuclear reactors costs consumers far more than available carbon-free electricity that does not add to Washington's waste and contamination burdens or pose catastrophic risks as they age well beyond original licensing. Notice the differences in syntax in those three planks. By the way, I looked it up, and power from the Columbia Generating Station costs 4.3 cents a megawatt. I got that right? No, 4.3 cents a kilowatt, which is competitive. Grant County PUD, where my family's farm is, has some of the cheapest power in the country, and they might have power that gets down to 2.5 cents a kilowatt, but 4.3 is respectable. And then almost, I didn't want to make a separate slide, but here's the DNC's platform. And this is why I say maybe it would be more fair to call the DNC nuclear agnostic. They recognize the urgent need to decarbonize. And so they're in favor of all kinds of stuff, including the relatively pie in the sky carbon capture and storage. By the way, I don't think I can see if you raise your hand, but if you want to just break in and ask a question at any point, that's fine with me. Okay, let's move on here. Yes, there was something, I don't remember if there was something about subsidies in the platform, but we do hear in the news right now that activists in the Democratic Party are working on addressing this issue right here. These are federal subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. Federal subsidies to the fossil fuel industry run into the several billions of dollars. The reason that's such a small number is that is per exajoule. An exajoule is, as I recall, 10 to the 18th joules. And we use many, many, many exajoules of hydrocarbon energy in this country right now. So I wanted to put the whole subsidy thing into perspective, and this will come up again in a short time. Again, please feel free to interrupt if you have questions. Now, another thing that I've learned about just this week, actually, as I've been reading, preparing for this talk, is something that was on NPR just this afternoon on my drive home from school. There was a story about how the United States is cutting off access to solar panels and solar manufacturing materials that come from a part of China where the minority group, the Uyghurs, have been forcibly relocated, and where it is said they are being forced to work in the factories that make solar panels. Add to that the coming used solar panel disposal challenges, and the honeymoon is just about over when it comes to solar power. So why? Why do people oppose nuclear power? Well, we hear this one, and in fact, that last, especially over-the-top worded plank in the platform was written by and argued for by someone who says that she and her family were harmed by operations at Hanford. Of course, operations at Hanford were all related to nuclear weapons from the better dead than red part of the Cold War. And I get really disappointed and impatient when people bring up the Hanford cleanup and Hanford contamination in discussions about nuclear power. It's way worse than apples and oranges. It's more like oranges and garlic, two entirely different things. Nuclear is too expensive. Well, we just talked about why intermittent power is so cheap. Many, not all, maybe not even most, but many solar panels are made in China by something approaching slave labor. And there's no closed use cycle. It's possible, but too expensive to recycle solar panels. It's much cheaper to make solar panels out of virgin material. And when you've built your industry on being a cheap source of energy, you're going to be reluctant to do anything that's going to raise the price of energy. I've already mentioned an actual cost for our local nuclear energy. It's not that bad. It takes too long to build them. I am going to address this on the next slide. Uranium mining and lung cancer. Lung cancer among Navajo people who mined the uranium that was used in the Manhattan Project came from radon gas, which is a decay product of uranium ore. And that is actually how we learned that radon gas can cause lung cancer in the early 60s. So definitely a significant past issue, although in this specific case, also related to weapons. And air quality standards in mines, at least American mines, have been tightened to the point that lung cancer in uranium mining is no different than lung cancer in any other industry. So that this issue keeps getting brought up is a little bit disingenuous. These are all serious things. I was getting a little punchy, I admit, when I wrote this line. But it is interesting to think about how there have been so few really serious nuclear accidents that we can remember the names of all of them. We can all recite the names of all of them. And the number of people who died in these accidents is surprisingly small. In fact, on a deaths per unit of energy generated basis, nuclear is the safest, or maybe slightly less safe than, I forget if it's solar or wind, that is next, and far, far, far safer than the fossil fuel industry. Waste. There used to be, it looks like it's been removed, or maybe I just missed it, but there used to be a plank in the state party platform that was this sort of qualified support for nuclear energy once the waste problem has been solved. And another picture that I forgot to include was a Google Earth picture of the place where they keep the spent fuel from the Columbia Generating Station. It's a space that's maybe half the size of a football field, maybe not even. and contains all of the waste from their entire history of operation, 30 years, and has room for waste for the indefinite future. Now, of course, it would be nice not to just park that stuff out in the desert in our case. There are perfectly viable alternatives for permanent disposal of this material. They've run into political problems that could be the subject of an entire separate evening. This is something that we got from Mark Jacobson at Stanford. He published a paper in 2015, I think, that claimed that all of the world's energy needs can be met by what could be fairly be called intermittent power. And someone published a paper critiquing his paper, and he sued them for $15 million, which is not a very respectable thing for a scientist to do. Mark Jacobson also talks about the carbon footprint of nuclear reactors. I'll talk about that on a different slide. And he's very concerned about bomb proliferation. I don't know very much about this. I would totally defer to somebody who knows something about this, but I don't think non-state actors can make actual thermonuclear bombs. I think it's just not something that they could do. They could make dirty bombs, but mushroom cloud type bombs, I don't think so. Not to discount this, but I'm just listing the major concerns. Next slide, please. So about construction times. Here we are looking at China, France, South Korea, the UK, and the United States. We have how long it takes to build and turn on one of these facilities, and the year in which all of these facilities of different sizes were completed. And you see that the United States, there we go. You see that the time has been increasing in the United States. 3 Mile Islands opened around this time in the late 70s. That means that it began to be constructed in the late 60s. And of course, most of what has been driving this increase in the United States has been regulations and activist opposition. You see South Korea is often held out as an exemplar. Here, South Korea has been plugging along, building nuclear plants in 5 years for as long as they've been building nuclear plants. And this is why I say that it can get a little bit, it's difficult when you want to talk about issues in the United States, and then you also have to mention issues internationally.
Now, who is in favor of nuclear? Who are the pro-nuclear folks? At the top of the list, for really good reasons, is labor. Labor likes nuclear. Labor likes to build things, and I'm not just talking about trades like electricians. For example, pipe fitters are concerned about opposition to natural gas. There are a lot of pipes in nuclear reactors because the way nuclear reactors work is they generate steam that spins turbines that makes electricity. Now, this group right here is really important. Republicans like nuclear, and actually, we probably have at least one legislative district in this state that would be purple if Democrats were seen as being more friendly toward nuclear power. Now, I included the 13th LD and also Grant County in here.
Because the Grant County PUD, which is one of the most conservative and best run PUDs in the country, and which is proud of the fact that it produces some of the most inexpensive power in the country, has signed a deal to buy power from a next generation reactor that is under development in Benton County. And I offer this as a counterpoint to claims that nuclear power is too expensive. I'm just going to have to assume that Grant County PUD knows what they're doing here. Bill Gates is an investor in a facility that is under development at an old coal-fired power plant in Wyoming. When I start talking about this stuff, I hear from a surprising number of Dems who say, kind of like, you know, in all of our areas, we all live in red areas, and periodically people will come up to us and they'll say, yeah, I'm a Democrat too. I support Democrats. I just can't have anybody know it. Same thing for nuclear energy in the state Democratic Party. Although we are seeing increasing numbers of progressives, including the co-founder of The Nation magazine, wrote a piece not too long ago about how nuclear energy has the best chance of fulfilling progressive goals. And then, of course, President Biden and Secretary of Energy Granholm. I watched the governor of Wyoming announce the plan to build the next generation facility at an old coal-fired power plant in Wyoming. And it was really interesting to hear Senator Granholm talk about it. She participated in this, and she had extremely positive things to say about the potential for nuclear energy, both from a climate change perspective and a jobs perspective. President Biden, there has been ongoing recently discussions about what to do about subsidies. There was a move by a number of environmental groups and some Democratic Party groups to have nuclear pumped in with petroleum when it comes to so-called subsidies. Biden has decided not to go that way. And then finally, as I say, the DNC platform may be a little bit on the agnostic side, but certainly at least not anti-nuclear. Now, why be pro-nuclear? Because nuclear energy produces 9 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour of electricity generated. Here's a look at other sources of energy. Wind is very good. Most of the carbon in wind energy comes from, I think they might call it the standpipe, the big metal pipe that the nacelle and everything sits on. The steel in the standpipe and the concrete in the pad make up 50% of wind's carbon intensity. Solar is somewhat higher because it's made of silica. And in fact, the reason solar panels are being manufactured in that part of China is that that's where they have the best coal. This is ironic, the best coal to produce energy for the factories that make the solar panels. But still, solar is an order of magnitude lower than natural gas. And in the parts of the country which are far from us, well, they're not. We use a little bit of coal still. But for every kilowatt hour of electricity that a coal-fired power plant produces, it produces, wait a second, for every watt it produces 1 gram of carbon dioxide. See what I did there? 1,000 grams, 1 kilogram per kilowatt. That's a gram per watt hour of electricity from coal-fired power plants. It's really kind of shocking. As you can tell, I was kind of shocked when I saw it that way. Our anti-nuclear friend from Stanford, Mark Jacobson, says that it's more like 111 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent for nuclear, because we have to count it, he tells us, the 102 grams per kilowatt hour of electricity that will be produced while we're waiting for those many years for the nuclear facility to be constructed. Apparently that has to be counted against nuclear also. I think you can tell which side I came down on after I stopped being an agnostic. So I'm just about finished. A quick look at progress in the nuclear industry. So it's really important to realize that the nuclear industry, nuclear reactor designs, nuclear reactor technology has been evolving since the first US commercial power plant at Shippingport, which operated all the way until 1981. Gen 2 are most of the reactors that are in operation right now. That Gen 2 is just one generation after Gen 1. Gen 3 is what are mostly under construction, and Gen 4 are the so-called next generation small modular nuclear reactors. This one here from X Energy is the one that's under development in Benton County. And their website likes to say that their design requires only a 400-yard safety perimeter as opposed to 10 miles for existing reactors. TerraPower is the one that is under development in Wyoming. And there are a surprising number of other small modular reactors under development worldwide. Here's a list, the whole Wikipedia page about it. So let's see what else I got. Oh, so this is me thinking about how most of the people that I hang out with on the statewide and national level are at best agnostic, and many of them are anti-nuclear. And maybe our best bet is for the agnostic folks, or for the pro but quiet folks, to pick a side. And if they want to be anti, that's fine. And certainly there are people who are formally anti-nuclear. I'm sure that I went through an anti-nuclear phase a long time ago. Surely there are people who are anti-nuclear who will be able to find themselves able to support nuclear power once they start taking climate change seriously. We can only hope. Meanwhile, we do have some opportunities, and this is my last slide. There are some really obvious opportunities for working across the aisle in Washington State. The people who live in Seattle who don't like nuclear energy but love intermittent power, they want a bunch of stuff that they could get more easily if more Republicans in Olympia would vote for it. And if the occasional Democrat would support bills that relate to nuclear energy, and there was at least one in the legislature this last session, that might really help a lot. Another thing, as the chair of the Environment and Climate Caucus, we're seen in the party as being sort of in conflict with labor. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but here's another pretty obvious opportunity for common ground with labor. And education can never be a bad thing. I think there's a lot for all of us to learn about this stuff. That is the end of my formal presentation. So let me read these comments here.